Begin the current Daf, Mesechtes Nedarim Daf test, begin on the top line of the Amid. We continue with Halacha, the next Mishnah, which continues in the theme of the first Mishnah, discussing the halachas of Yodis Nedarim, which, although we said the title of this parak is called Kenuyi, but like we already brought in the first Daf, that we actually first explain not the slang, but rather the Yodis, which are the partial statements. During today's Daf. Some of the discussed in today's Daf are, like we said, cases of Yodis Nedarim, certain types of specific cases of the partial statements of Nedarim, which are considered like Nedarim, which are not. Now, there's the two categories of vows, donations that a person does. One's called a neder, one's called a nedava. A neder is generally as harei olai, and nedava is harei zu. But the Ran's going to explain today's daf because there's certain cases that you cannot qualify like that. A carbon, you could say that. That a neder, okay, I'm taking a vow that I will bring something, and the dava is this thing, but certain times, like we'll see by the case of nazir, you can't make such a differentiation, yet we're calling one a neder, one a nazir. The Ran will explain that neder is something that is not totally with full donation, because you're not actually designating it right now. You're like, oh, I'm going to do it. One day I'll do it. Nedava is actually right now separating and designating this thing. You see that the person has more generosity of spirit in the Nedava, and therefore that's why that's Harei Olai, that's Harei Zu. But it's not that that's the intrinsic definition of Nedava and Neder. That's just how it manifests by carbon. But by Nazir, it will depend on simply on the generosity of spirit of the person, and that will be the primary criteria. So to begin the current Daf test, the Mishnah begins. This Mishnah is also, again, explaining cases of Yodis or partial statements. And the Gemara is going to explain that what we're saying is as follows. So if you read the words of the Mishnah, it would be pretty vague and ambiguous, but the Gemara will explain it the way we're saying it right now. If someone says, Kinidrei Rishon, okay, I'm going to like the vows of the wicked, Noda, he takes a neder, which, so let's say, for example, the Nazir. So, if he says, Kinidri Rishon Hareini, the Mishnah is not saying this. The Gemara will explain, what does it mean you're making a neder like the vows of the wicked by Nazir? It means, the guy says, Kinidri Rishon Hareini, I am like the vows of the wicked, and at the same time when he's saying this, there's a Nazir passing by in front of him. So, Hareini, you usually would say Hareini Nazir. Now, he didn't say, he said like, Kinidri Rishon Hareini. But since there's a Nazir walking in front of him, it must mean Hareini Nazir, which is how the wicked are, because they're always taking vows. So too, if let's say, Ubakarbon, let's say he says, Kenidri Rishon Olai. Generally, when you say Harei Olai, you say Harei Olai Carbon. But he's saying like the vows of the wicked is Olai. So then he's Chayv like carbon. Which the Ran says it's also logical to say that it's also talking about specifically where there was an animal in front of him. And he means that that animal is going to be a carbon. So when you say Kinidri Rishon Olai, it means regarding it's a yad, it's a partial statement for a carbon. And ubishvua. If let's say he says Kinidri Rishon Heimenu Shaloi Eichel, like the vows of the wicked, from it I will not eat, and there was a loaf of bread in front of him. So that's essentially like an oath that he's not going to eat it. Now, the reason why you're chayiv in all these cases when you say Kinidri Rishon is because wicked people generally make these types of vows. And since it's not appropriate to do this, that's why they're called the vows of the wicked, because the person is at least wicked in regards to this idea that he's taking this oath, this neder of Nazirus or carbon. Now, let's say he says Kinidre Kisherim, like the vows of those who are upstanding. So even though he says Hareini or Olai or Heimenu, which are all these different terminologies of Nazir or carbon or Shvua, and he actually had a Nazir or Behema or Kikar in front of him, so that would seem to be the exact same thing we said by Kinidri Rishon. He's just changing one word, he's saying Kinidri Kisherim, then Lo Yom HaKlum. He hasn't said anything. You know why? Because Kshem don't take Nedarim, because you're not allowed to. So therefore, that's why it's not going to have any validity. Same thing if, let's say, he says, Kinidvas Rishayim Olai, he hasn't said anything. You know why? Because Risham don't make Nedavas. Because if they would make a Nedava, they wouldn't be wicked for that thing. So saying Nidrei Kesherim or Nidvas Rishayim is not valid. Only the wicked make Nedarim So kinidrei rishoim, that would be a valid neder. But let's say you say kinidvaisam, like the nedavis of kesherim, and for that you're nadar benazir ubekarban, that would be a valid neder. The reason that is because kesherim are menadiv by karbanis and by naziris. So when the person says hareini, and there was a nazir passing in front of him, he's going to be a nazir because he said kinidvas kesherim. So if let's say he says a lie, which is again a partial statement, and there was an animal in front of him, and he had said kinidvas kesherim, that's like as if he said that it is a karban nedava, because it's in kinidvas kesherim, so that's a karban nedava. But the Ram does point out that it didn't say one case when he was talking about kinidvaisam. It didn't say the case of shvuah, because that you would not be chayiv even if you said kinidvas kesherim. Even if there was a loaf of bread in front of him and he says, Heimenu shelo eichel, from it I'm not going to eat, because ksherim never take a shvuah ever. So there's never a nidvas ksherim on a shvuah. Says the Ran, what do we mean? Didn't we just say in the previous daf and daf ches, dilizruze nafshayu, that to make themselves diligent, they swear l'kayim es ha-mitzvah. I thought they do make a shvuah. Says the Ran, that shvuah is not called a nedava. Why not? Because he's already obligated to fulfill a mitzvah. So that Shavuos HaMitzvah is not really donating anything, you're already obligated anyway, they're just doing it to be Mazaris and Avshai. Now, the Ran says what you could be Medayik is an interesting deek which we pointed out in the introduction. Nedava generally is when you say Hare Zu. This, you're donating it, it's ready, it's prepared. A neder is when you say Hare Alai, that I'm taking it upon me. That chilik you only have by nedarim of karbanos. But let's say by naziris, what type of neder or nedava is applicable? It's all the same thing. When you're taking naziris, how could you make a neder of naziris or nedava of naziris? What would make something into nedava? So says the Ran a big chiddush. He says that what neder means is something that's coming not totally in the generosity of spirit. Nedava means something that a person is doing more from his nidvas nafshay, and his actions are more acceptable. And that's why we say that by neder it means harei olai, because he's not totally, generous right now. Well, how do we say he's not so generous? Because you're not preparing it, you're not designating it right now. You're saying, I will. It's a lie. And the dove, on the other hand, when you say harei zu, you're donating it, it's ready, take it already. That's more acceptable. So since that's the interpretation of neder and nedava, so even by nazir, because we said in the Mishnah, we said the nedava of nazir, kshem will do, the neder of naziris, they won't do. So how do you translate it by nazir? Is that even though you're right, the neder of naziris is no different than when you're taking the nedava of naziris, but whomever his intent is more acceptable, that's called his naziris as nedava. If it's not so desirable, that's called a neder. And Rishonim take a neder of naziris because their intent is not so really desirable. But the ksherim, since their intent is intact and desirable, why? Because their naziris has no traces of sin at all, so therefore their naziris is called a nedava. And the Gemara is going to explain how could you qualify that? It's a hard barometer to translate what's considered a nedava and naziris. The Gemara is going to bring a famous story with Shimon Tzaddik on Amid Beis to show you someone that took a naziris and he had it coming from a generosity of spirit, and therefore that's called a nedava. So if you want to say kinidvas kesherim, there could be such a concept of nidvas kesherim for naziris, in contrast to nidrei kesherim, which would not be effective for naziris, because it's not really harei ulai harei zu. It's really be'etzim. What it comes down to is really the idea about how desirable is what you're saying. Now the Gemara has some technical parts of the Gemara. The Gemara says, the opening case of the Mishnah was, if a guy says, kinidrei rishoim, so he's taken a neder. Says the Gemara, maybe what he's saying is, kinidrei rishoim loy nadrano. Maybe he's saying that, like the vows of the wicked, I'm not going to take a neder. Because like the Mefarish, which that's the Rashi we have, like he explains that the guy didn't really explain anything. He didn't say, again, you have to understand that we already explained the Mishnah based on how the Gemara is going to answer. But if you read the Mishnah just kinidrei rishoim nadar, That's all he said was Kinidri Rishon. So we said it's going to be another, and the same thing will be by Naziris and the Carbon Shvua. But he didn't say anything. He didn't say Hareho Alai Kinidri Rishon. He just said Stam. Maybe what he was saying when he said Kinidri Rishon is Loy Nadram, and it's nothing. So says the Gemara, no, you're right, that's not all he said. Amr Shmuel, he says V'Omer, when he says Kinidri Rishon, and he added on one more word depending on the case. He either said the word Hareini, or Alai, or Vehemenu, and the Gemara explains what each one of these three terminologies would be. It's one of the three cases we mentioned in the Mishnah. Hareini, if he says Kinidri Rishon, Hareini, that's B'Naziris, because Hareini, I will be, is a state of being, which is what a Nazir is. When he says Kinidri Rishon, Alai, on me, that's generally B'Karbon. You're saying Harei Alai, Oyla, Harei Alai, it's on me, a responsibility. That's a carbon you have to bring. And Heimenu, from it, meaning it's saying prohibiting yourself from something, is b'shvua. So that's each one, you'll say one of those three words for one of these three cases, so it's obvious that, yeah, b'shvua is from it, that I'm swearing that I'm not going to eat from it. But the Gemara asks, wait a second, okay, so you told me the first case was Hareini, and you're saying that that's considered Naziris. You say, Kinidri Rishon Hareini, like the vows of the wicked, I am. Says the Gemara, Dem Hareini b'tainis kama? What do you mean? I am what? Yeah, it's a state of being, I understand that. But who said state of being of Naziris? Maybe it's state of being of taking a fast, of not eating. So Mashmuel, and we already explained this in the round when we said the Mishnah, it's Kishahaya Nazir Oivel Lefanav. We're talking about where there was a Nazir passing by in front of him, which the Ran's preferred interpretation is that that's similar to what we say in the first parak of Kedushin of Hema Beis, that when a Nazir is passing in front and he says, Aha, I will be, Hareini is not any less than a aha. So the only problem he has with that is, so then why did the Mishnah have to tell us when it said, why do I have to say Kinidri Rishon? The Gemara in the beginning of Kedushin said, all you have to say is Hareini. If Nazir is over the phone, just say aha, say Hareini. Why have to say Kinidri Rishon Hareini? So the Ran explains, because the Mishnah wants to tell us that if you say Kinidri Rikesherim Hareini, Nidri Kesherim Hareini, then even if a Nazir is passing by, it's not going to be effective, because Kesherim never make Nadarim. So therefore the Reisha said Kinidri Rishon, but says the Ran en Chanami, that as long as he said Hareini, even if that's all he said, and the Nazir was passing in front of him, it'd be a Nazir. Because that's how we find the Gemara Kedushin of hey, that I will be what? Oh, we see a Nazir passing by. Obviously that's his intention. So the Gemara says, okay, and you answered, you said that the word Heimenu from it means b'shvua, from it as an oath. Problem is, Dilma Heimenu da'achil mekama. Maybe from it, what I said, Kinidri Rishon Heimenu, from a loaf of, as the vows of the wicked, from it. So how do you know it means I will not eat? Maybe it means I will eat. So what's the Gemara's question? So the Ran explains, in other words, what the Gemara means to say is, since you could say that maybe means that I will eat and not that I won't eat, so that's what's called Yadayim She'ein Mechiches. So it's not clear. It's a partial statement. We definitely know you're talking about this loaf of bread, but what do you mean when you say Heimenu? From it I will eat or I won't eat. So Shmuel holds that Yadayim She'ein Mechiches Allah having Yadayim. So it's essentially a question on Shmuel. If it's not indicative, it's not a yad. So how does this halacha of the Mishnah work? So Rav explains. He says no. The Amma it's where he says Heimenu shelo yaichel. He says clearly Kinidri Rishon Heimenu shelo yaichel. So that's the case of my lemon. What's it to say? That's pretty straight up. So the Gemara says no. Ma'adetem, what would you say? It's still considered as a yad, and you wouldn't know this because halei mapik shvumi pumei. Ultimately, he never said an oath out of his mouth. Because like Mefarish explains, he didn't say explicitly shvua shelo yaichel. He just said Kinidri Rishon Heimenu shelo yaichel. Kamash Malan Hadein, that's what we're coming to teach you, that since he said Kinidri Rishon, it's as if he said an oath from his mouth, and therefore it will have halachic status as a yad, mechiach, and therefore he will be forbidden from that loaf of bread to eat it. Now, we said in the Mishnah that Kinidri Rishon, if someone says, like the vows of a kosher person, lo yamaklum, he hasn't said anything. But Kinidvaisam, then Nadar b'chulu b'nazir b'karban, a kosher person does make nadavas, he just doesn't make nadar. So the Gemara says, and again, there's like a technical part of the Gemara, Mam Tana. Who is the Tana of our Mishnah? The Shani le benedel nadava. that's differentiating between a neder and a dava. That you're telling me that a kosher person would take a nedava, but wouldn't take a neder. Who is the Tana of Mishnah? Lema, let us say, Lo Yirmei Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to quote a brayso right now that quotes two Tanaim. It seems our Mishnah is not like either one of them. Why is that? Because the Tana written a brayso that says like this. Brayso says, Toiv ashalei tider v'goymer. Better that you don't take a vow, etc. Now, what does the pasuk there end? Mishut tider v'lei teshalom. So the pasuk is saying, better don't take a vow at all than taking a vow and not paying up your vow. Says the first Tana, better than this and this, meaning better than vowing and paying up your vow, and from vowing and not paying it up at all, is so Jameir, you know what's better than all of them? Is don't take a vow in the first place. Now where does Jameir get this from? If you read the pasuk, it doesn't sound like that, because the pasuk before that said, Isa shatider shilim. That which you took a vow, you should pay up. And then it says, better don't take a vow. In other words, that better than taking a vow and paying that we just mentioned before is to not take a vow at all. And that's the pasuk is giving the reasoning for it, which is the end of the pasuk. Because like the pasuk ends off, Mishatider v'lei shalom. According to Rameh, what does that mean to say? In other words, you might forget and you might not pay up. So therefore, better don't take a vow at all. Now, at this point in the Gemara, it sounds like to us that there's no difference between a neder and a dava. Because if not, the pasuk should have told us, hey, you know what's better than all? Is neidiv mishal. Pasuk doesn't tell us that. Sounds like the best option of it all is don't take any vows at all. That's Rameh. Now, Rabbi Shloimy says, no, toiv mizeh mizeh, better than this one is neider u'mishalim, is to take a vow and to pay it up. So he learns the pasuk like this. The previous pasuk said, "Eis hashatider shilim," that which you took a vow you should pay up, and that's the best option. But it's definitely better not to take a vow than to vow and not pay it up. And then you can say, wait a second, that's pretty obvious. No, what the pasuk is saying is, don't think that when you took the vow, you're adding on merits to yourself, because yeah, look, I took a vow, I promised the shul I'm going to give $5 million, and then, okay, if you forgot or it was beyond your control, you didn't lose at least your good spirit that you had. It's not like that. Because the reward is not at the time when you take the neder, when you make the pledge. It's when you pay it up. So therefore, that's the machlekes regarding what's better, to take a vow and pay it up, or not even to take a vow and pay it up. The best is don't take a vow at all. That's the brayso. Very much unrelated, essentially, because our main question is, we see both Rameh and Rabbi Yehuda are not differentiating between the neder and the nedava. Yes, according to one of them, according to Meir, it's better not do not neder, not nedava. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's better to do neder and nedava and pay it up. But they're not differentiating between neder and nedava. So that seems to be not like the Tana of Mishnah, who differentiates and says neder not, nedava yes. So who's the Tana of Mishnah? Not like Meir and not like Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, no, Filtem Reb Meir. You could even say that the Mishnah is like Reb Meir, the Getintam and base. How so? Ki come Reb Meir, when Reb Meir say that's better not to take any neder at all. And for Kasherim, that was beneder. But Nadava Kamar, it wasn't talking about Nadava, because the pasuk was only talking about Nedarim. And regarding Nedarim, it's better not to take one at all. But it wasn't talking about Nedava, and therefore, if it was a Nedava, then yes, most definitely, the Kasherim do take Nedava, and Nedava would be better than everything. So therefore, it could be like Remeir. Question is, says the Gemara, but that's not true, because look at the Mishnah, Baktani. The Mishnah said, Kinidvaisam, like if you're taking like the Nedava of Kasherim, and what were the categories? Nadar, Benazir, Ubakarbin. Obviously, that the Kasherim are Nidrim. So how can you explain the halacha of the Mishnah like Remeir, that Kasherim don't take Nedarim at all, when you see that you can make a Nedava of Neder? Says the Gemara, no, there's no Nedava of Neder. Tanei, Nadav. We're saying that if it's donating, but Nazir, Ubakarbon, that's the cases, but you're right, they don't take Nedarim at all. Now the Ram does point out that his teachers explain that this question the Gemara is posing right now, that, wait a second, it says Nadar, and the Gemara answers Nadav. The Gemara could have asked on the Mishnah itself, not on Reb Meir, if you want to say the Mishnah like Reb Meir, because The Mishnah sounds like that Kashem don't take Nedarim, because you said if you say Nidre Kashem, you haven't said anything. And then you say Nadar, that they could be Nadav and Ned. I thought they don't take Nedarim. I thought there's no Nidre Kashem. Rather, it's that originally the Gemara first makes a diuk that obviously it sounds like our Mishnah is differentiating between Ned and Nadav, and we want to know who's the Tana of the Mishnah. And once we explain the Tana of the Mishnah like a mayor, then we go back to make the diuk that, well, it says Nadar. But we could have really asked this on the Mishnah itself. But says Duran, no, ain't a nearly. He says, it doesn't seem to be correct to me. Rather, no, it's specifically, the Gemara's question is only because you're explaining the Mishnah like a mayor. Because if you don't explain the Mishnah like a mayor, we could explain that when a kosher person takes a neder, since he's doing it wholeheartedly, then it is appropriate to do that. That's called a nedava. And this is the point that the Ran had pointed out before. You could have things that would be technically ned and nedava. It just depends on how acceptable is your desire. And even though we could say this, so we don't find the Tana necessarily differentiating between ned and nedava. The Gemara said, took for granted who's the Tana differentiating between ned and nedava. The Gemara only said that because that's the truth. But the Gemara itself rejects it the other way and said, no, not necessarily does have to be like a mayor. And you don't have to differentiate between ned and nedava. And therefore then the Mishnah would make sense. But if you want to say the Tana Mishnah is like a mayor and there's a difference between ned and nedava, well then how do you go ahead and call a neder of a carbon as nedava? But since you're telling me that they don't make nedar at all for ksherim, then you cannot call it nedava, and therefore it's a question specifically on that we're saying the Mishnah is like a mayor. So again, that's what the Ranz is pointing out, why we're asking the question over here, not previously. Is it like his Rebbeim said, we could have asked it earlier, we just asked a different question, or is it because no, it's specifically on Remeir and not on, if we said the Mishnah, then we would say, yeah, there's no difference. They make certain nedarim that are like nedavas. But be that as it may, the Gemara continues and says, wait a second. So what's the reason why you're telling me that no, nedarim, they're not going to go ahead and do why? Because them asabal the takala. You tell me, kshem don't take nedarim, you take a vow, it might come to a mishap, because you might not fulfill your neder. Like we said from Remeir. So the nation also, you shouldn't make the masabal detakala might come to a stumbling block, because even though you said harezu, so you already separated, but a guy might be negligent and he might delay it, bring it after 3 Yom Tov, and he'll be abal ta'acher. So why are you saying Hashem we're going to make nedavas and not nedarim? Why aren't you concerned also for some takala? Says the Gemara, no, we're not concerned for that, because kihil hazaken. He's going to do like Hill the elder. In other words, if he says on the animal that's right there by the azara, that's kenidvas kesherim. That if he makes a neder by a carbon, kesherim, what they do is they bring their animal to the azara and they sanctify it right over there, like Hil Azakan used to do, and then you're not going to run into any problems because it's right there. There's no delay. The time I learned the Brayso Amra Hil Azakan, they said in Hil the elder, Shleimal Adam by Lasa Kol Yamav, that a person never committed me'ilah, misappropriation, in his carbon oila as long as he was alive. Why not? It's very easy to commit me'ilah. If you have an animal that you bring as a carbon, if someone leans on it, that's it, you got benefit from it, you committed me'ilah. Because you know what he would do? He would bring it when it was still unconsecrated to the court judge, which the Ram points out doesn't mean literally the azar, because now it bring chulin to the azar, just means right there by the entryway of the azar. And he sanctified it, and he slaughtered it. So therefore, there was no concern. That's the type of nidre, that's the type of nidvas kashem that we're talking about. So you're not going to run into any problems. In Neder, on the other hand, who knows, you might never separate it, you might never give it, you might never come to do it. So therefore, that's why we're differentiating in our Mishnah between Neder, that Kashem will not do, and the Dava they will do. So the Gemara asks, okay, Hanich and the Dava the Karbanos. I get it, that what it means to say Neder and the Dava when it comes to the halachic category of Karbanos. Because, like we said, the Neder is Hariolai, and the Dava is Arizu. But the Dava and Nazir is Michael Mema. How exactly are you going to explain a Nedava of Naziris? In other words, how do kosher people make a Nedava Naziris? But you have to be considered they might come to a takala by Naziris, which there's so many halachas, and they might cause to stumble in any one of these areas. What would make that a Nedava versus a Neder? That Neder is not good of Naziris, and Nedava is good, but you would run into the same takalas you would run into whether it be a Neder or a Nedava. So it says the Gemara, taking out the word savula, is kashim and hatzadik. In other words, what it means to say is that any neder that comes from such a certain context that the person's intent is so desirable, we are not going to be concerned that it might come to a takala. What does this mean? The time like look in the Braisa. That Amar Shimon Tzaddik said that Miyamai lo yechalti ashim nazar tameh. In my life, I never ate from an ashim that a nazar brought that was tameh. Meaning, what happened is that if the nazar started counting his days in naziris, and then it becomes tameh from a mess, the halacha is that it contradicts his whole counting that he counted up until this point. And he brings a carbon and he's going to start over counting again. So Shimon Tzaddik says, I never ate from an asham that a nazar tameh brought, ela echad, one time. What's the story? So Pamachas, this is the famous story. Pamachas, one time, ba'odem echad nazar min Nadarim. One time there was a certain person, a nazar came from the south, but he had beautiful eyes, a beautiful complexion, and his locks were organized, hanging, beautiful hair. I said to him, Bani, my son, what did you see to destroy this hair of yours that's so beautiful? Because although a nazar grows it, which is also one way of growing wild, but then you cut it off. So what do you see fit to take such a thing as naziris that you're going to destroy your hair? He said to me, let me tell you what happened. I was a shepherd for my father in my city. I went to draw water from the spring. You look in the water, you see, I saw my reflection. And he was swift. Again, you could understand a lot of things here of the Yetzer Hara and about the person's different ego states that he has inside himself in the story. So, my inclination was very swift and jumped on me. He wanted to chase me away from the world. The way the Ran says it is because he wanted me to go after what my eyes see. And my eyes saw a physical world. And when you follow your eyes, then you get chased out of your own world. Because you're living on the outside, not living on the inside. The way the Mefarish says it is a little bit different. He says, since I saw in the water my form that's so beautiful, so my inclination was overpowering and wanted to take me to do bad things, to chase me away from the world. But be that as it may, he was getting ensnared in the beauty, the physical beauty of the world, to do things that will disembowel a person, disembodied, where he's just going to be chasing the physical world and not live in the spiritual domain. So Martilay says, I said to him. Now you have to understand who's talking to who. I said to him. But that's if a person understands different parts of himself, and you have what's called the knowing eye. When someone says, I don't think I should have done that. I don't think that I should have done that. Who's talking about who? I don't think that I should have done, someone is talking about someone. I don't think that I should have done that. So you have to understand, there's the knowing eye, there's different parts. And he's talking to himself, but he's talking to the Sitra Achar part of himself, however you want to say this. He says, Rasha, wicked one. Why are you being arrogant in a world that's not yours? Well, which world is he talking about? What do you mean it's not yours? A lot of questions that you could think about and contemplate on this Gemara. But this is not your world. You have a very different world. Why are you being arrogant in the world that's not yours? And he who is going to ultimately be worms and maggots. He swore by the service of God, I'm going to shave you off for the sake of heaven. Miyad Umadati says, Shimon Hatzadik, immediately I stood up, when the Shaktav Rosh, I kissed him on the head. Martila, I said to him, Beni, my son, Kamaycha Yirbu Nazir Naziris B'Yisrael. Like you should increase those who take Naziris amongst the Jewish people. Allah the Pasuk says, Linda Neder, a man's going to enunciate to take a vow. Nazir lahazir laHashem. He's going to take a vow of Naziris for Hashem, meaning that his Naziris is L'Shem Shamayim. That is what the Gemara wanted to bring from this story, that you could have Naziris that will be considered as Nidvas Kesherim, because the intent is so desirable that this person will never come to a takala, this person will never falter, will never stumble, will never be upset, and he'll continue to follow the halachas of the Naziris, even if he's got to start over, no matter what the situation is. Like this guy who was an Ashim Nazar Tameh, became Tameh, and he's not frustrated. He's going to continue doing it because he's doing it for the righteous intent, not for some other purposes. Which actually, that's how the Gemara ends off. The Gemara says, Maskiv lo Rav Mani. which seems parenthetical, but it's really following the same theme. It says, Maishno, what's the difference? Asham Nazar Tameh. So regarding the Asham, the guilt offering of a Nazar became Tameh, he never ate from that. Why not? Because the Asachet, it sounds like because it came because of a sin, that the person didn't keep the halach of Naziris, that it became Tameh. But if that is the case, then Kol Asham is Nami Lelechel. Every carbon Asham shouldn't eat Al Chet also. Every Asham comes for a sin. So why is he not eating from specifically the Asham Nazar Tameh? So Rabbi Yomi explains, no. High in the time, the reason is like this. Kishein Tayin, when people err and they regret regarding their bad actions, so nicer. People go extreme, they say, I'm becoming a Nazir, and he wants to like take this aesthetic life, and wants to separate from the physical world, he regrets what he did. Now, what happens is in the Bali Mussar are always warning about this, that people go in extreme because they want to go to the other end, and they Kshein Tamei and Matama, what happens is when they become Tamei, suddenly it's not so glorious and beautiful anymore being this hippie, it's suddenly this challenge. You got V'Rav and Alem Yimei Naziris. What happens is that now the days of the Naziris that he took are increasing. Where he never had intention more than doing it 30 days, but guess what? On day 21, he passed by somewhere and became Tamei. Guess what? You got to start all over again. Suddenly they have regret. The Nimtzu Mavin Chul Nazar comes that they're bringing unconsecrated animals to the Nazar, which the Ran says it's not really precise. As long as the Chacham wasn't matter his Naziris is still valid, and obviously he has the chiyuv to bring his karbanas. It just means it's like Chulin, because since his intent is not so desirable, also his karbanas are not really so desirable. But this man who came from the south, even though he became Tamei, there's no concern over there. Because since his intention was so desirable from the beginning, we can testify that he most definitely did not regret because he was doing it with such righteous intentionality. So then the Gemara says, if that's the case, I feel a Nazar Tar Nami. Then even a Nazar that's Tar also, like the Mefarish explains, maybe he regrets his Naziris and comes out that he's being Chul into the Azara. Because, he took it for 30 days, but in the days 16, he's like, I can't do this anymore. I need a couple of grape juice. I need something. I can't do this. Says the Gemara, no, Nazar loy. No, for that we're not concerned. And shouldn't I tell you we eat from the carbon of a Nazar, because Damude Amid Nafshe. A person assesses himself, the Yochalinda, that he could take such a neder, and therefore that makes sense that you paced yourself, you knew what you were getting yourself into. But the problem is when things get in the way that you didn't calibrate, you didn't calculate, that's when that's like I don't want to have such an ashram because this person is not doing it wholeheartedly. And that's the difference between nidre or nidvis of Naziris that we said that was Ksheim are going to take. The Nadava one is like this person that came from the south. His Naziris was a Nadava, not a Neder, and that's the type of ashram that Shemat Tzadik would partake of. Thank you to any time.